Those of you who watch me talking about journalism, I always say this is the best time to be a journalist. I would like to say it's the worst time to be a diplomat, in a sense, because no one has the luxury of time anymore to react to developments, to react to what is happening, to react to the latest tweet, Instagram, or for that matter, Truth Social post that comes just as you think things are going the opposite way. So the diplomats we have on stage, including Her Excellency Nirupama Rao, who was India's Foreign Secretary and Ambassador to the US as well, are seeing how you no longer have to only just look at what's happened and then take your time to analyze it. You're analyzing as you speak. These have not been easy years. You know, in the previous session with the Chinese ambassador, I spoke about the 2020s being this roller coaster ride. But it's true for the whole world. It's not just India-China ties. 2020, COVID. After that, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, followed by the attacks in Israel and the Israeli destruction of Gaza that followed. Followed by so many other events, but most notably the US tariffs, Mr. Trump, what we call Trumperica now, and all the decisions taken over the last year, followed by this year's war, which was unexpected. You know, it began with Venezuela, it went on to talk about Greenland, and then suddenly we see this US-Israel strike on Iran, and then Iran's reaction. All of us here who know people, and I'm sure that's true of everyone in the Gulf, knows how that entire region has been upended for the moment. And then you come to the present moment. If you've lived in India, you've also got the LAC standoff with China. You've got the India-Pakistan conflict to add into the mix. So this has been a very, very difficult time. And we're talking about the power of words, diplomacy at this time of conflict. I wanted to start by asking each of you what you make of the moment, but in particular, what we also want to try and move towards, the idea that it's not just about big powers behaving badly, but what do the rest of us do? All of you, or many of you, would have heard Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney speak earlier this year at Davos, where he said, you're either at the table or on the menu. And that's what middle powers have to take away from. If I could start with you, Ambassador Delphine, do you have a mic next to you? And ask you how you see the current moment and whether you see there is a hope, in a sense, for this idea of the middle powers versus the big guys having a chance.
Thank you very much, Suhasini. It's a real pleasure to be with you and with such eminent panelists. I think the finality of the question is what kind of world is emerging, whether by design, by events, or by the law of unintended consequences. And it's fair to say that we are so much in an era of paradox and polarization. Polarization, we see it at the level of states, within societies, and transformation, whether demographic, technology, climate, which would assumingly necessitate more cooperation than ever. So you have this sort of paradox of, on the one hand, less willingness to cooperate, but the need for cooperation is greater than ever. So the world order, as we've known it since World War II, is indeed has to be reinvented. And the question is indeed whether it will be an order, a compact, or the sum of dynamics, and I think with no real structure emerging. So for us, it's really about, as we are from the European perspective, the answer is pretty clear. I mean, we want to be working together with those who are considered agents of change for cooperation, and this is where maybe I would tend to reject the terminology of middle powers, because middle powers, in what way? You stand in the middle of something? Are you middle power by what metric? By the size? By the GDP? Or so I think the risk is to box people or countries or the situation in categories. The same way Global South is such a motley of different countries. So for us, what is most relevant is intention. It is agency, and it is capability. And those who want to work together, so to indeed address those global challenges we face, that reject the idea of spheres of influence, which is honestly a kind of colonial concept of the 19th century rather than a modern concept. Those who believe in a rule-based order, who share principles reflected in the UN Charter. And in that respect, the EU, I think, has put at its credentials and its track record of being a reliable, responsible global partner. I mean, we have 66 trade agreements with different countries and geographies, and that represent 55% of the global GDP. China, by comparison, have trade agreements with 77 countries, but representing way less in terms of GDPs, and the US with 33 countries representing 24% of GDP. And I'm not seeing this as a beauty contest. I'm seeing those who try to work together, those who try to create a level playing field and a rule-based environment, de-risking from uncertainty. And I think that is also very much in the back of this mother of all deeds, the EU-India agreement. So this is in this space that we are trying to, I would say, work with every other partner who would like to put forward proposals, advance initiatives underpinned by cooperation. And it's true that collectively we may have, by aggregate of values, an important, it would represent an important weight if you think of Australia, Brazil, Japan, and all the likes. The question is whether we want to gang up together against the other. And I think the mistake would be to position ourselves like this. I think we have to be issue-based, and I think we have to be inclusive. And this is the element of inclusivity that would ultimately make the difference.
All right, very nice that you don't gang up, that you find issues that you can be in common on. But does that really work, High Commissioner Green? Australia, of course, a treaty ally of the US. You stand with the US on absolutely every position. But Australia, too, has been hit by the US's, shall we say, unpredictability of the past year. Do you think that it is possible to stand up to the very global powers that one is allied with? In fact, do you think alliances themselves are no longer in the same currency?
Well, first of all, it's a great time to be a diplomat.
Happy to be correct.
I've been in this game for more than 4 decades, and I've never known a moment where what I do, what my team does, feels as consequential as it currently does. And there's a long and distinguished history of Australians thinking, ordinary Australians thinking they know a lot more about foreign policy than experts, but that time is gone. And expertise is valued in Australia in diplomacy in a way that is very welcome from my perspective. So you're right to identify Australia as a treaty ally of the United States, and one of the key things that I wanted to say today is that we regard our relationship with the United States, its treaty status, and working together with other treaty allies, most obviously Japan, but also those whom we have much in common like India, is one of the key ways in which we seek to get through this difficult moment in regional and global affairs. No question about that. You're wrong to say that Australia never parts company with the United States. In fact, just 24 hours ago, my Prime Minister said that we had an ideological difference between Australia and the United States in relation to tariffs. So I'd like to get one key thing straight here. People talk about the global rules-based order, and many people talk about as though it has ceased to exist. And I think that's wrong. So the reality is that throughout global history, raw power and rules have been in engagement with the way in which we think about the world and the way in which the world works. We have never had a moment in global affairs where rules didn't exist or weren't important. We have never had a moment in global affairs where raw power wasn't important. Now, it's obviously true that raw power has had a good half decade. But that doesn't mean that the rules-based order is extinguished. And just think about it this way. I know what makes the headlines is when the global majors do things which seem in conflict with what we know to be the global rules of the road. But, 95, 98, 99% of global trade goes on every day, according to rules set by the WTO. 95, 96, 97% of global shipping goes through waterways across the planet in accordance with the international law of the sea. 99, perhaps close to 100% of global telecommunications traffic happens according to the rules set down by the International Telecommunications Union. So this is an important platform from which to say, rather than worry about a world where the rules don't exist, we need to protect the rules that we have, try to build them out more if we can. And by the way, just in the last few months, there's been a new treaty on global pandemics. So we're not. It's true that the new rule-making part of the global order has slowed down, but it hasn't stopped. And so, for my country, defending those rules, sandbagging them where necessary, pushing ahead with them where we can, becomes enormously important. I'm not with Hervé that I don't know what a middle power is. You should come to Australia. Even when you're about the 14th biggest economy in the world and deeply reliant on trade and peace and security in your region for prosperity and security, then you know what it is to be a middle power. But I am with him in saying that I don't see this as the big guys against the rest. When I think about the way in which Australia responds to a tougher world, I think first of all about what we do unilaterally, what we do in Australia to harden ourselves, to strengthen ourselves, to make ourselves more sovereign, to protect our sovereign identity. And secondly, I talk about the issues and collectivities in which we can work together, and sure, many of those have middle powers, but some of them have great powers in them. AUKUS, Quad. And thirdly, I think about the way in which we would work with regional institutions, ASEAN, the Pacific Islands Forum, and global institutions like the UN to strengthen the sort of future that we want to have.
All right, thank you. Ambassador Rao, I think I know what you will say to whether India sees itself as a middle power. I sense a pushback from Ambassador Delphin as well. But I wanted to also ask you very specifically, sometimes when I'm speaking to diplomats based in Delhi, they always say, it's very confusing for us. India is part of the Quad, it's part of the BRICS and the SCO, it has one foot in one boat, it has one foot in another boat. So if the saying goes, where you sit decides where you stand, where does India sit?
Thank you, Suhasini. And talking about a career in diplomacy, I think I wouldn't exchange it for anything else even today. Although I do respect the work you do as journalists, and particularly what you do.
But we're richer for that choice that you made.
Thank you. When it comes to, just to take off from what you said, who do we save the last waltz for, right? There are many takers. I was thinking of what I would say in answer to your first question about the state of the world today and where India finds itself. So I would focus on 5 or 6 propositions in this regard. And my opening proposition would be that we are, as my distinguished diplomatic colleagues here said, we're not really witnessing the birth of a new world order. And I'm reminded of those lines from Yeats, written more than 100 years ago. What rough beast slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? And we are really seeing an erosion, perhaps, of the old world order. The post-Cold War moment is definitely over. The institutions remain, and we can vouch for that, and as High Commissioner Green said just now, but their authority, I believe, is contested today. And power is diffusing. It's diffused, but it's not disappearing. The real question is about whether power can be accompanied by legitimacy. Secondly, I think the point I'd like to make is that we're in a world of intermediaries. I would rather use that term rather than a middle power. Or recently, I think one of the East European international affairs specialists spoke of the concept of the middleman, but I really wouldn't like to use that either. Because the emerging world order is not really multipolar, as we'd like to very often use that terminology. It's really intermediated, in my view. And the US and China, I wish I'd been here for the Chinese ambassadors panel, but the US and China remain indispensable. There's no doubt about that. But the influence, if you can use that term, increasingly belongs to states that can communicate across divides. And I'd like to emphasize that. The ability to communicate across divides. For instance, Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Turkey, and in certain circumstances, even Pakistan, have demonstrated this. So my soundbite would be, in today's world, connectivity may matter as much as capability. The other point I want to put forward is that the Iran war has changed the conversation. I mean, we wouldn't have been speaking on such lines perhaps if we'd met in December, but February 27th has changed all that. Hormuz reminds us that geography still matters. A conflict in West Asia immediately becomes a global economic issue, and energy, shipping, inflation, remittances, important for a country such as ours, and supply chains, again vital for India, connect the Gulf directly to Asia, and that really brings West Asia and the situation there right to the threshold of what we call the Indo-Pacific. So it's not a very comfortable situation. It's not a distant theater. This is all a part of our extended strategic neighborhood today. And why does India matter in all this? We're not a traditional middle power, as you would define the term. We're not yet a superpower, obviously. But I would like to define India as a pivotal power. A pivotal power, because we speak to Washington, we engage Moscow, obviously we do, we all know that. Old relationships matter. We maintain ties with Iran. We have deep partnerships with the Gulf, and we're active in the Quad and BRICS. So our value lies not in choosing sides, but in preserving channels of communication. Now, how do we reinterpret strategic autonomy? Again, it's almost a cliche, the way it's dropped into conversations.
It's coming back.
It comes
Every
back.
time we think it's over, we hear it
Absolutely.
again.
It's like Banco's ghost, I think. So strategic autonomy is not passive neutrality in my definition of the term. I'm not in Delhi Durast, as I would say. But to me, it means engaging all sides, retaining independent judgment, most important, and preserving the freedom of action. So it's not about sitting on the fence. It's about keeping your balance when others are falling off theirs.
All right. I'm going to stop you there because I want to take that to Ambassador Delphin, this idea that we're not sitting on the fence, but we're a pivotal power. And we pivot sometimes towards Russia. We pivot sometimes towards the US. So for European Union, that always comes up as one of the big issues. This is definitely the year of EU-India. Before High Commissioner Green objects, I will also say it is the year for Australia-India because we expect a prime ministerial visit there later this year. But I mean, EU and India, the mother of all deals, the visit by the EU leadership, if there is an FTA signed by the end of the year, and I'm hoping you'll tell us about that, Prime Minister Modi will head there. I wanted to ask, do you think that we can have these common ideas, as you said, agree on certain issues when it comes to trade, when it comes to transactions between us, and yet be completely different when it comes to our worldviews?
I mean, I agree with the term used by Ambassador Rao about pivotal or consequential. And I really would like to put EU and India in this category of consequential powers. And that makes the EU-India partnership tremendously consequential. I mean, if you put these two geographies together, 1/4 of demography, 1/4 of global GDP, I mean, that is also a power of attraction towards others. I think we don't have an imperialistic agenda. We are trying to promote global solutions. So it's not just the benefits of our bilateral relations that we draw from each other, is I would say the externalities, what it represents for the rest of the world and the values we carry. And I think we should not underrate that. It has an immense, I would say, attraction power and traction power. The fact that pointing at, we are not aligned, EU and India, we are not aligned. And I don't think we want even to try that. I don't think that's the name of the game. I think we've been able to navigate our differences in a rather, I would say, smart way. All what you mentioned points to one direction, is that India and European economy and technology ecosystems are going to get increasingly integrated. And that in itself will define the trajectory of the future. And I think this is what is important, that historically that India will see Russia as an Asian power, while we see Russia as a European power, that the geography matters. And this, we understand that. What is at the core of it, where the discussion is that, please, India, mind our security red line when it comes to Russia, the same way that India may say, mind our security red line when it comes to Pakistan or China. And I think that is fair. And I think that is a conversation we can have, and we do have it.
Okay. I'd also not be a journalist if I didn't ask, do you think there is going to be a ratified India-EU BTA by the end of this year, FTA by the end of this year?
BTA, no. BTA is not an FTA. An FTA is a real win-win. I don't know if the BTA is, but at least I can vouch that the EU-India FTA will be. Experience has shown that any FTA that we have signed yield benefits for both sides and double trade in a matter of 5 or 10 years. So I'm pretty confident that this will be signed, the timing of which I think you have to breathe in the neck of those the legal teams that are doing now this very thankless task called legal scrubbing, the vetting of all the text, all the annexes. But I think I'm pretty confident that by the end of the year, actually it may not just only be the signing of the FTA, but another bunch of deliverables coming together.
All right. High Commissioner Green, there's another FTA we're talking about with Australia, of course, the CEPA, and the possibility that when Prime Minister Modi goes to Australia this year, we could see it signed, or Prime Minister Albanese could come here if we have a Quad summit. And I wanted to ask you the same question. Is it essentially transactionalism that is going to guide us? Because this common values and common views and being aligned and ticking off which side you're on doesn't seem to work.
Well, unlike my dear friend, we do feel strategically aligned to India. And more than that, we now talk about strategic trust. In the last 10 days, I've had both my Deputy Prime Minister, who's the Defence Minister, and our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, here. And that is the language that we are talking and that we are hearing from the Indian side. Of course we have differences. And of course we have a very different posture to Russia's illegal and outrageous war in Ukraine. But there is vastly more that binds us together, particularly in our shared region of the Indo-Pacific. And that's why we are driving towards much closer defence and security collaboration, huge new uplift in maritime domain awareness across the shared ocean that we live in the Indian Ocean. So, number one, we are for strategic alignment with India, and there's a lot of terms that are thrown about what India is and isn't. But when I'm in the room with our ministers talking to one another, I see a very high level of trust and determination to do even more together, because as the world becomes tougher, Australia and India want to be able to rely on each other more. So, in terms of trade, we're a bit ahead of the EU because we did our first phase free trade agreement with India 4 years ago. So I want you to take away one statistic from all of what you hear today, and that is that in the last 5 years, India's exports to the world have grown by 40%, which sounds pretty good, right? In the last 5 years, India's exports to Australia have grown by 200%. So on the back of the first phase free trade agreement, India is benefiting from trade with Australia 5 times faster than it's benefiting from trade with the world. And maybe the EU will follow. So we are in the throes of intense negotiations at the moment on the second phase of the free trade agreement. I don't think it'll surprise anyone to say that the things you do first are probably easier than the things you do second. And I'm not going to answer your question about whether we're going to land a deal in the next few months, Hasni, because the key thing for us, and I also think for the Indian trade negotiators, is that we get a good deal, not a quick deal.
All right. Ambassador Rao, you were Foreign Secretary when we saw the first, perhaps the beginnings of the Quad being laid to rest. Subsequently, we saw the Quad come up again. And yet we're seeing now that this transactionalism is seeping in, and regardless of High Commissioner Green's conviction about Australia and India, there are a lot of misgivings about a coalition like the Quad being anything more than 4 countries coming together. And I repeat that Pete Hegseth statement where he said we need less Shangri-La and more ships. So the only ship, by the way, we're seeing in the Indian Ocean is the one, the US one that torpedoed an Iranian ship right in our waters. So my question to you would be, do you see India needing to take a side at some point? Or is India going to essentially remain this kind of pivotal power, which arguably gives it only observational status rather than actually being part of one or the other side?
Well, I would answer your question by first and foremost stating that diplomacy is about shaping conversations. And that's what we do as diplomats. And I think Indian diplomacy is definitely to focus on that. It's about establishing a presence. It's about the ability to shape the script and to kind of guide the conversation. And I think India has the ability, has the inherent capacity and the wherewithal to really do that. Now, when it comes to the Quad, yes, I was, in a sense, present at the creation, you would say, because when I was High Commissioner in Sri Lanka and we had the Boxing Day tsunami, and India, of course, was the first responder when it came to dealing with the crisis, but then you had the United States Navy and our partners in the region really do humanitarian relief and disaster alleviation. And we all came together, and really that was the kind of kernel on which the Quad was formed. And I was also present as ambassador in China, the People's Republic of China. I remember that meeting when I was called to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing, and the Chinese had this kind of interrogation squad about the Quad, about what was happening. And then, of course, I think the Australians and others, we all kind of came to the consensus that maybe this was not a propitious time to advance the idea further. And then you come to the Trump won, and suddenly the Quad, like a phoenix risen from the ashes, revives itself. And that's where we are at the moment. But the question, I think, that arises, despite what Pete Hegseth had to say at Shangri-La, I believe that with the absorption and the kind of diversion of attention of the United States to what is happening in Iran and in West Asia, the Quad really, I think, now rests very much on the shoulders of a triumvirate of countries, India, Japan, and Australia.
So in other words, the middle powers, if you like, could form another such treaty. Commissioner Green, a two-finger on that? Can India, Australia, and Japan form a more cohesive? Because we've seen in the past few years, Australia was to have hosted the Quad Summit, for example. The US president didn't show up. India has tried for the last 2 years, didn't happen yet. Is it time for the non-global leader or global powers to come together?
Well, it already is together, and there already is a trilateral that applies between Japan, Australia, and India. I would have to say it's not nearly as powerful or as consequential as the Quad is. And, you know, I suspect I may be the only person in this room who was in the room with the 4 foreign secretaries last week. And the level of alignment was very high, and there was nothing in that room that suggested to me that we needed to, you know, break off from one of them and get together as a group of 3. So, you know, we think, I mean, Nirupama's thoughtfully put forward the history of the Quad. We think that we're in a very good space now, and we think Hegseth said, Marco Rubio said yesterday that we were looking towards a Quad summit later this year. I think we're on a very good track in the Quad at the moment. But other bilaterals and trilaterals will have their place, and perhaps will even have more place.
Well, certainly we do have still a packed second half of this year. I think we have time for one question, which is a long one, from Sayan Panda. India has pursued strategic autonomy for decades. This is for you, Ambassador Rao. Yet our per capita income remains far below that of many countries that chose formal security and economic alignment with the United States. Has strategic autonomy imposed an economic opportunity cost on India? And is it time to be more opportunistic?
Well, opportunism, transactionalism, what's in a name, as they would say. But I am just thinking of the future as far as India is concerned and as far as Indian diplomacy is concerned. Sometimes you think, just imagine if the India of the 1950s came to dinner today, and how they would find an India far more powerful, far more accomplished, far more influential, far more recognized around the world for what we are as a responsible democracy. But are we able to, again, coming back to what I said earlier, are we able to shape the conversations? Are we able to prevent fragmentation from becoming conflict? These are the questions I think Indian diplomacy needs to ask itself today. What is the distinctive contribution that we can make? Because strategic autonomy cannot be quiescent autonomy. It has to be far more, we're a very vocal country in many ways. We're argumentative, we put forth ideas, and I think that inherent capacity has to be demonstrated a little more when it comes to our diplomacy.
All right. I'm going to come to you in just a sec because we have so many questions. I'm just going to go through with them. There are 2 questions here for both the ambassadors. If modern conflicts are increasingly fought through narratives rather than territory, should diplomatic success be measured by achieving peace or securing narrative legitimacy in the eyes of global audiences? So is peacemaking really the new answer? And the other one is, you spoke about the various treaties that are still in effect, but don't you think that most of them are abided due to convenience rather than a commitment to international law? First to you, Ambassador, or do you want to go first?
Yeah, maybe on the, I think it's true, it's maybe a challenging time for diplomacy, but I think the need for diplomacy has never been greater. honestly. If it's only the raw power that is the game of the day, it will lead ultimately to chaos. And you see how the situation has evolved in West Asia and in other geographies. So I think that this is where maybe some of the so-called middle powers, I would say, those who really try to push for diplomatic solutions, because of the fallout of those crises. I mean, we've seen it in Ukraine and now in Asia. It's fuel, it's energy, it's fertilizers. It's always, the externalities are for the others. And I think that is also a fair lesson, that diplomacy is also to cushion of this negative fallout and trying to bring back to the table, because there is no other solution. So I think that this is, on that side of the conversation, you will always find the EU. But diplomacy doesn't mean you're ready to accept everything. I think the notion of principles that guide your action is key. And I think the rules of the UN Charter, the territorial integrity, sovereignty, these are elements, I think, where India and EU and others will recognize themselves. Now, I would also say, and maybe because Philippe, you seem to suggest that we in the EU will not see, we were different, that we were not strategically aligned. I just want to say that the EU and India are certainly highly strategically convergent. I think we have never been at this level of strategic convergence. And the same way that trust nurtures the relationship between Australia and India, I can tell you the level of trust between the EU and European member states and India have never been greater. Just look at the intensity of travels between India and Europe. It has never been as high as this. I think maybe what is now incumbent upon them, and this is maybe something that the EU and India should also explore, is what can we do together to address situations? I mean, India has, I would say, leverage as agency to engage in conflict situation. And maybe sometimes it's difficult for India to take a role in that. I think EU would certainly value that, because India probably doesn't necessarily come forward, but maybe it would play a very useful role that could be welcome. And I think that is something that we need to reflect together on.
All right, I'm going to leave the last word to you because we're really running out of time. High Commissioner Green, there was a question.
Okay, so there's a question about convenience in international law. And of course, occasionally following international law is convenient, but for the vast percentage of time, it's highly convenient. It's highly convenient to know what the rules of the road are so that we can each go along them. So, and doesn't this moment tell us that when suddenly the question of whether there is freedom for maritime trade through tiny straits in the world, suddenly that comes into question. We've always thought, oh, it's very convenient that we can all travel through the Strait of Hormuz, we can all travel through Taiwan Strait, we can all travel through the Lombok Strait. And suddenly you look at an opening crevasse of maybe that's about to be unraveled. That's how international law is highly convenient for everybody, and we should try to hang on to it.